Yeah, it's really great to be back. As y'all mentioned, I was here in 2022 for a scholar visit. I got to come back since then, but it really just does feel like visiting friends at this point. And I just love to be back here doing ministry with y'all, but also getting to spend some time with you. But yeah, to answer your question, George, so when people ask me what I do, I tell them I teach English and philosophy. So I just say, I'm just trying to make the world a better place. I teach grammar and logic. So, but anyways, but yeah, so at my 2022 visit, I did share my testimony a little bit in a dialogue interview format with Fuzz. And I remember I focused a lot more on the intellectual side of my testimony during that time. So I was excited to share this with y'all, try to get it done as soon as I can and not go off on too many rabbit trails. But I have more of a personal side of my testimony I was going to share with y'all that kind of shows you more than just the intellectual that was going on in my life. Whenever I was converted to Christianity, and I was hoping it would be an encouragement. At least maybe you'll get some laughs, but yeah. So we were mentioning I'm from Lubbock, Texas. I claim Lubbock. I actually grew up in the Panhandle area, in small towns around Lubbock. So it's just easier to claim Lubbock as my hometown. They call it West Texas. I've never been too entirely sure why they call it that, because there's a lot of things that are more west than Lubbock, like El Paso and Midland, Odessa. So, but to be fair, it is west of the center. So I guess that's why we call it West Texas. But yeah. So if you're familiar with the area, it really does have a Bible Belt feel. I grew up in a Christian home, and we were always moving around to different small towns around Lubbock. But I just hate to admit it, but growing up, we did go to church regularly. But I just didn't have that much of an interest in what I was hearing. I didn't have a desire to read the Bible. Just to be really honest, it was more like a chore that we had to do on Sunday morning. I don't know how many kids feel that way, but that's how I did. And so that's kind of where I was at spiritually. Just before I forget to mention this, I do want to say that because of the influence of my parents, I do remember when I was middle school age, praying for Jesus to come into my heart. So, but when I think back on it, I think that was like the extent of my theological knowledge, was that I had asked Jesus in my heart. What does that mean? I'm not sure. So, so maybe I was saved through the faith of a child. But we'll come back to that later. Well, so growing up in West Texas, to be honest, I was all about video games. So once I got my first Nintendo, that was basically it for me. I didn't do much sports. I just was kind of like what we were talking about. I was at the house playing video games was usually where you could find me. I just wanted to. I was doing well in school. It was fun to do well in school, but I'd never found a subject that really took a hold of me and made me want to really pursue it in my free time. So if you ever found me outside of school, I was at the house playing video games, basically. Okay, so moving on into high school, this is really, and I think if you talk to philosophers, a lot of times they'll have these weird childhood stories of these questions they were asking when they were like 3 or 4 that no one ever even imagined. But I was really kind of starting to come into that. I think I was starting to be a budding philosopher in my own right. And that's when I start getting all these questions. That's when I actually started learning, that's when I started paying a lot more attention in church. I really did want to understand what the pastor was saying. I didn't want to just receive the message. I wanted to understand how all that made sense and how it all fit together. So this is a time in my life where I really started to ask a lot of tough questions. And, now it seems like basic questions, but I was asking maybe some questions that are hard for a lot of people to answer, like, if my specialty, right? If God is all powerful and all good, why is there evil in the world? How is it okay for God to command the Israelites to move in and kill people in the land of Canaan? if God is unchangeable, if He's eternal, then why do I need to pray if He already knows all of history? How is that going to change anything? So I have all these questions. I'm trying to make sense out of it in my head, and I'm asking my friends. I'm asking my family. I probably should ask my parents more than I really did, but I remember at least asking my friends, asking my parents a little bit, and even going to pastors to ask for these questions, and unfortunately, I wasn't getting the answers I was hoping for, and the more I asked, and the more I would either get a shallow answer, or no answer at all. The more I started to think that maybe there aren't answers to this. So I really started to get discouraged. Let's fast forward a little bit, because all of this will lead into a story that's not too many years later. So I graduated high school in the summer of 1999. We always said that they saved the best for last, so class of 99. But anyways, I had seen too many war movies, okay? My dad also served in the Army in Vietnam. And so at this time, just one day in my junior year, I just up and decided it would be a good idea to go join the Army. Okay, so out of high school, I went into the Army. I actually skipped my high school graduation to go to a processing center in Amarillo, Texas. So I never even went to my high school graduation. But, I'd seen too many movies. I remember taking the test, and they said I could choose whichever job I wanted. But I chose the infantry of all things. So anyway, so here's me going into the military. I signed up for 4.5 years, and in the infantry, I was in Fort Benning, Georgia for most of that time. And during this time, I really did kind of go through this search for truth phase. I did start reading. I started looking into other religions. I thought, well, maybe there's something to those. I looked into Islam. I read some things with Buddhism and Hinduism. I think I even kind of, went to the New Age section in the bookstore every once in a while too, just looking to see what I could find. I remember after looking through a lot of it though, I had just as many questions about those. And to be honest, it had that same feel where I was like, I don't think there's much to this. And maybe it's just another thing that you just have to believe, or you're just receiving from whatever your parents believed. Okay, so that really started to make me more skeptical. And at this point in my life, in these 4 years in active duty military, I was starting to call myself agnostic, atheist kind of thing. Okay, so I got done with my 4.5 years in the Army, and I went back to Lubbock, Texas, and I enrolled in Texas Tech University. Okay, so now this was in 2004 when I went back to Lubbock. And before I got completely off of active duty, when I was out processing, they talked me into doing this thing called the Try One program, where you don't get fully off of active duty, you transfer to a National Guard unit near your hometown, and you try it for 1 year. I keep doing the quotes because like 6 or 7, I can't remember how many months into it, we actually, our National Guard unit in Lubbock, Texas, got orders to go to Iraq. So the Try One program turned into Try 2.5 for me, because I was ordered halfway through it to go to Iraq. It was 6 months of training and a year deployment. That wasn't that new to me, because being on active duty from 99 to 2004, I had been on a 3-month deployment to Afghanistan after 9/11. I was in the invasion. So it wasn't all that new to me. It was scary I don't want to, it was an interesting time in the life of the National Guard, so I don't want to say anything bad about that. But it was a little scary, because the people, I was used to being with highly trained people. That's just not a thing as much in the National Guard, because it's, we're a bunch of weekend warriors. So, but anyway, so this is 2004. I get pulled out of school. I had only gone for 1 semester. And then we went to 6 months of training, and then we're in Iraq. So I was just going to show you all a couple pictures and try to show you where we were. There is a little bit of interesting trivia that goes along with this, our location, and a little bit of ties to the Bible. But here's a picture of me. I look a lot younger. I have hair in this picture, so it's kind of fun to look back on that time. But so we're in the National Guard, and whenever you get deployed as a National Guard unit, you don't get the most glamorous. I mean, what is glamorous in war? But you don't get the most glamorous jobs. Okay, so, and my company, our infantry company, actually was like strewn all throughout southern Iraq. In fact, even in my own platoon, we didn't all serve together in the same place. Well, this picture of me is at the place where I spent most of 2005, which was a radio relay point out in the middle of the desert in southern Iraq. So I was going to show you all a slide that kind of, I don't know if you can see this map I pulled off of Iraq here. We were in very southern Iraq, southeastern, because if it's not the best map, and it's always easy to remember, we were along Highway 1. So. But yeah, so there's this highway that goes all the way down to Kuwait. We were south of that town that you see there, Nasiriyah. So we're in southeastern Iraq. We were stationed at what was called a radio relay point. So we had two main jobs all year. And this is very remote. Like, not even my whole platoon was there. I think it was like 10 or 12 guys all year long. And we're there were all these radio relay points all along the highway, about 45 minutes apart. I can't remember exactly. But as a radio relay point, so one of our main jobs this is 2005, so we don't have the most amazing technology at that time. And sometimes the easiest way to get a message to a command center was to call the closest radio relay point, and they would relay that message up along the chain of relay points to some command center. So that was one of our main jobs. Was we always had to have someone just sitting there on the radio listening, so they could pass a message up and down the line. Another thing was that we were there for other practical reasons as well. We were up along the highway because, so whether you were a civilian truck driver or maybe someone in the military driving trucks of any kind, we were there if you broke down on the highway and needed help. So we were there to provide medical help, mechanical help. A lot of times truck drivers, civilian truck drivers that weren't in the military would park right next to one of our relay points because, that was kind of like we being there with all these machine guns were kind of a deterrent for people to attack people right in front of us. So they would park right next to us, take a nap, and then get going the next day. So, if you got into some trouble, you could also call a relay point. We would send 3 or 4 guys that we could spare, and maybe they'd help you out. It was a small group of guys, and if anybody wanted to take us out at any time, I think they could have. But like, what are you gonna do? Just go take our radio, So it was an interesting time, and sometimes I think that it really was God shining His grace on me, because at this time in my life, He basically gave me a year to my own thoughts. Okay, so really quickly, I just want to get to some just a side thing about all this, which I found out it became a lot more meaningful to me later on. So if you see this map and this picture here, I think it was like, down Highway 1, an hour or two was Kuwait, but an hour or two to the north, up near Nasiriyah, was this ziggurat. And I actually was able to walk to the top of this thing. We walked all around it and looked at it. Supposedly, this is a ziggurat that was constructed in an ancient city called Ur. And if you're familiar with that, they think this is the area of Iraq where Abraham was called by God before all that part of Genesis. So anyways, I'm not saying like I'm some kind of Abraham figure that was called out of Ur, but I just thought that was really interesting. I've never been to Jerusalem, but I was able to go around Abraham's old stomping grounds. So, but this is the area where we were. So, but I wanted to. All of this is leading up to a story I wanted to tell. It was a very pivotal point when I came to Christ. I really enjoy this picture. Just as a side note, whenever I was dating my now wife, we've been married for over 10 years now, but when I was dating her in the beginning, I told her that I read philosophy when I was in the military, and she thought it was just a line I was feeding her. So when I found this picture, I got really excited because it was photo evidence that I was reading philosophy while I was in Iraq. But But yeah, I'm not even, I just had like one semester of college under my belt, so I'm not even a philosopher at this point. I was studying finance anyway, so I'm an armchair philosopher. But this is a time where I'm struggling with this stuff, and I'm still interested in religion, even though I was really skeptical and agnostic at this point. But I still was searching for truth. And as far as the intellectual side of my testimony, and this is what I shared last time I was here, I trace a very pivotal point in my intellectual relationship to Christianity and thinking about God's existence to this book. I remember in this, it's like in the 5th edition now, but this is a philosophy of religion edited collection. It's just a reader with all these different articles on philosophy of religion and things like that. Well, in this book was an article by the Christian philosopher J.P. Moreland on the Kalam cosmological argument. And I read that article. If you're familiar with the Kalam argument, it's this philosophical argument that there must be a beginning to the universe. One thing that really struck me was his argument that the past can't be infinite, because if it was, an infinite number of things needed to happen before today. But since I got to Iraq at one point, or because we put our keys in our car, we could know that there wasn't an infinite number of events before today, because if there was, then we would never got to today. Anyways, I know some people like it, some people don't. But whenever I read that, it just took a hold of me. And I really, to be honest, I struggled with it. I wrestled with it. At this point, I was kind of, more on the jaded side, and I assumed that there wasn't going to be evidence for Christianity. There wasn't going to be evidence for God. So when this was like one of the first logically laid out evidence and reasons to believe that God exists, and it made sense to me. And for days or like a week or so, I was trying to figure out, I was like, that totally makes sense, but the conclusion just can't be true. So I've got to figure out what's going on here. And I couldn't. And I remember being in my room one day thinking, I think God exists, like for years I didn't think he did. And I was just like, man, I just can't, he exists. Like if there's a beginning to time, there has to be God there. So anyways, so this is the intellectual side of what's going on. But there's also, it's kind of an embarrassing story, and I also don't usually tell it because I have to make an embarrassing admission, but also sometimes I think people are going to think I'm a little crazy. But it has to do, you can see it in this photo, there's a tower behind me. We did a lot of guard duty, right? Because that's basically you're either on the radio or you were on guard duty. So we had two big towers like that. It's that structure you can kind of see behind those, behind the sandbag kind of thing. We had a tower facing to the east. We had a tower that was facing to the east was the highway. Facing to the west was just oblivion. It was just you just looked at desert forever. Well, one fateful night, and this is after I'm wrestling with the Kalam argument. At this point, I think God exists, but maybe I like that conclusion, maybe I don't. But I couldn't. I just assented to it. Now, just a little bit of backstory before I get to what happened in the tower. And I'm not sure. Maybe this has to do with me kind of dabbling in New Age stuff. I'm not sure why this started happening to me, but it definitely was something that happened to me after high school and during my time on active duty military, before I got out of active duty Army and went to Texas Tech. So I was going to tell you all a story that happens before 2005. During my time on active duty, I started to experience sleep paralysis, if you're familiar with the term. One of the most memorable times was one of the first times it ever happened to me. So if you've never heard of sleep paralysis, it's basically where you wake up and you can't move. But this was it was more than just that for me. So I remember one time I was back, we were in Matador, Texas. It's a small town about an hour from Lubbock. I was home on vacation, and I was with my dad hunting, and we were at my grandmother's in Matador, Texas. I think that night I fell asleep on the couch watching TV or something, but I remember being on the couch in the living room, And I kind of come to, and I realize that there's two people standing over me talking about me like I'm not even there, or like they don't realize I'm awake. So I was just going to kind of turn to look and see who it was, because the voices didn't sound familiar. And that's when I realized I couldn't move at all. And it really jars you. So you're like, why can't I move? What's going on? And so then you try to scream, you try to move, but you just can't. And what happens is usually it's like a minute or so, and then it goes away. And then whenever you finally can move, like I'm looking to see who's there, and at this point nobody's there. So it's really weird, and it's a weird experience because you never know if you were dreaming or not. Whenever you can't move, you're in the same position in the same room. Seems like you're awake, but whenever you finally can move and the people and whoever that was disappeared, you're like, was I dreaming? Was I not? It's so real. I never had something like that happen to me as far as like two people standing over me talking to me. What happened, this did happen to me, not super frequently, but occasionally throughout my time in Georgia, it would happen to me wherever I was at. But instead of two people, usually if I would wake up, I could tell out of the corner of my eye that there was a dark, shadowy kind of figure at the corner of the room. And then that's when I would realize, who's in my room? And I would try to look, and that's when I would realize I couldn't move. And then, I'd go through the process, and then when I can finally move, no one's there. So it was kind of something that just, sometimes I thought about it, sometimes I didn't. Well, now fast forwarding to 2005 with this kind of background. So this one night, and I promise this rarely ever happened, but I was on guard duty at around 2 or 3 in the morning. I don't remember what time it was, but I know it was really dark that night. We did have night vision goggles. You could look through that, but if you're on like a 2 or 3 hour guard duty thing, you're not going to just sit there and burn batteries. If we thought there was something to look at, you'd look at it, but most of the time you're just kind of staring out into the darkness. In southern Iraq, it actually kind of reminds me of West Texas around Midland, Odessa, because you can see these flames on the horizon, right? They're burning off gas in all these places. So a lot of nights you're just standing in the guard tower looking at the flames and thinking about how much time you have left on your deployment. But yeah, so one night though, so I'm up in the tower. Maybe I had drifted off, maybe I hadn't. But there was a tall chair up in the tower, so it was tall enough so when you sat in it, you could see over the railing fine. And a lot of times you'd sit in it for a while, and then you'd stand up, and then, just whatever you're doing. But one night, it's in the middle of the night. Maybe I had drifted off, maybe I hadn't, I'm not sure. But I heard someone coming up the steps of the tower. If you look on that picture, maybe you can kind of see that we didn't have a ladder up next to it. There were just these rungs that were built into the tower. So anytime someone would climb it, they would kind of do this motion. And it kind of had a cadence. If someone was coming up, you could hear them. It was this metallic, ching, ching kind of thing. So I'm in the tower, and I hear someone coming up the ladder, and it doesn't even startle me that much. I was actually excited because I was thinking, well, maybe it's my squad leader coming to check on me. Maybe it's just one of my friends. Sometimes even when you were down there not on guard duty, you'd get so bored you'd go join the person up in the guard tower just to have someone to talk to. So I hear someone coming up the ladder, and I don't think much of it. But I want to tell y'all, the thing that came up the ladder wasn't my squad leader or one of my friends. Out of the corner of my eye, so it feels like I'm awake. I'm not sure if I was or not. But I hear that noise coming up, and then out of the corner of my eye, it's that dark, shadowy figure just came up the ladder in the middle of Iraq. So, I think this one didn't last that long at all, but I realized I couldn't move, but it only lasted for like a second or two, and when I turned, there was nobody there. And this was just so real. I heard those steps, it was that same figure that seems to have been following me all this time. And that really troubled me. I don't think I slept much that night after I got off of guard duty. And it really was, I think, like the next day that it just troubled me so much. And this is on top of the intellectual stuff going on. I think that, really made me realize that God is real. And then, this stuff happening was kind of this experiential part where I was like, that's real, I know, and this stuff seems pretty real, so it's, starting to look like Christianity. So I think it was like the very next day. In the military, chaplains have Bibles all over the place. So if you're at a base, usually you're going to be able to find, it's like these camouflage, or back then anyways, they had these camouflage New Testaments, And I grabbed one of those, and I flipped to the end where the plan of salvation was, and I prayed for Jesus to save me. At this point, I just completely surrendered. So, that's, it just amazes me what God was doing here, because, there's a couple things I wanted to say is that, because I've heard people in church say, well, we don't need apologetics. You can't argue anyone to the kingdom. It's just like a cherry on top. It's just something fun to think about and talk about. But we don't really need all that. And I just want to say, before I forget about this, I want to mention, though, after I prayed to Jesus to save me and devoted my life to Him, I've never had sleep paralysis ever again. Was it all in my head? I don't know. It's extremely real to me. So, but I've never had sleep paralysis again. I've never had that experience. So I'm pretty sure He's been protecting me ever since. But yeah, I mean, I was out in the middle of the desert. I didn't have a chaplain coming to me all the time, trying to preach the gospel to me. I didn't have any friends at the RP site that were trying to evangelize me. It was just me and this book on philosophy of religion and the Holy Spirit, and apparently maybe a fallen angel. And God used this book, this chapter on the Kalam argument, as the means to bring me to Christ. Was I truly a believer back then? Maybe I was converted, regenerated whenever I prayed for Jesus to come in my heart. I'm not sure, but I know that God was pursuing me, and He used the Kalam argument in this chapter as the means to bring me to believe that He existed, and then all these other things to bring me to have faith in Him. So this is one of the reasons why after I experienced that, after I got married, I wanted to go learn the philosophy. I wanted to go learn the apologetics. One of the things I've always wanted to do is be that person with the answers. Because, and I know y'all especially know this, some people are just going to believe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But analytically minded people, especially in the science community, it needs to make sense before they're going to believe it. So this is what I've trying to devote my life to, is making sense out of Christianity and communicating that to people. And that's just another reason why I love Reasons to Believe so much, is because y'all are doing exactly that to the science community. So thank y'all so much for having me. And if y'all had any questions, I think we can do those for the next few minutes. So.